I am Naomi, 33 years old, and 2 days before Christmas, my father smirked over his crystal wine glass and ordered me to serve my brother's 30 rich friends like a common maid. My brother just nodded, fully expecting me to cook clean and bow to his guests. I simply smiled. That very night, I boarded a first-class flight to Hawaii. When they woke up to an empty kitchen and 30 hungry billionaires, my brother's face turned pale. But the absolute best surprise was still to come. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to walk away from toxic relatives who severely underestimated your worth. The snow was falling heavily outside the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of our Aspen, Colorado winter estate. The dining room was warm, filled with the scent of roasted pine and the expensive Cabernet my father had just opened. We were sitting around a massive mahogany table. My father Richard sat at the head of the table. My mother Brenda was to his right. My older brother Trent, who was 35, sat across from me with his stunning 34-year-old wife Jasmine. Jasmine is a beautiful black African-American woman from a highly educated, prestigious family in Atlanta. She carries herself with an air of absolute royalty, mostly because Trent lied to her and convinced her that our family comes from generations of massive wealth. My father tapped his silver fork against his wineglass to get everyone's attention. A smug, authoritative smile stretched across his face. Trent has invited 30 of his VIP investment partners to stay here at the estate for the holiday week, my father announced, his voice echoing in the large room. These are high-net-worth individuals. Since we do not have full-time staff at the moment, Naomi, you will be taking over the household duties. You will be cooking 3 meals a day, cleaning the guest rooms, making the beds, and serving drinks in the evenings. Do not do anything to embarrass your brother. I set down my fork very slowly. The clink of the metal against the porcelain plate was the only sound in the room for a brief moment. I looked at my father, then at my brother, who was busy admiring his own reflection in his knife. No, I said calmly. I will not be doing that. My mother Brenda immediately slammed her hand on the table. Excuse me, she snapped, her face flushing with sudden anger. Do not use that tone with your father. You are 33 years old, Naomi. You are single, you have no husband, and you have no children. What else are you possibly doing with your life? It is the absolute least you can do to earn your keep around here. I looked at my mother, feeling a cold wave of realization wash over me. Earn my keep. The phrase was almost funny. For the past 10 years, I had quietly sacrificed my own youth to bail my parents out of their disastrous financial decisions. I worked endless nights building my company Apex Luxury Management from the ground up. I paid off their secret debts. I kept them from going to prison when my father made terrible illegal gambling bets. In fact, 3 years ago, when the bank was about to foreclose on this exact Aspen estate, I bought it through a blind corporate trust to save them from public humiliation. I let them continue living here rent-free, pretending they still owned it. They had no idea that I was their actual landlord. Before I could respond to my mother, Jasmine chimed in. She crossed her arms, her diamond rings catching the light. Grow up, Naomi, she said, her voice dripping with extreme condescension. We are actually giving you a chance to practice some basic domestic skills. Maybe if you learned how to properly cook and clean, you would not be sitting here alone at your age. Do not be selfish and ruin Trent's $50 million deal just because you are bitter about your own life. Trent finally looked up and nodded in agreement with his wife. Jasmine is right, he said smoothly. Harrison Cole is going to be here. He is a billionaire investor. I have been trying to get him to sign this contract for 6 months. This weekend has to be flawless. I need someone to handle the background work so I can focus on entertaining. You owe me this, Naomi. You have been living under our parents' roof for free. I owe him. Trent drove expensive sports cars leased under my company's name without knowing it. He wore tailored suits paid for by credit cards that I secretly paid off every month. He was a finance broker who brokered nothing but lies. He had completely fooled Jasmine into thinking he was an elite finance mogul, and my parents happily played along with his delusional fantasy. The sheer audacity of their demands should have made me scream. It should have made me flip the table and reveal the truth right then and there. I could have easily pulled out the property deed and kicked them all out into the freezing Colorado snow. But a sudden, much better idea formed in my mind. Screaming would only make them call me hysterical. I needed them to feel the exact weight of their own incompetence. I needed Trent to completely humiliate himself in front of the very people he was trying to impress. I took a deep breath and let the silence stretch. I looked at my father's demanding glare, my mother's disappointed scowl, Trent's arrogant smirk, and Jasmine's pitying sigh. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a single tear. I simply offered them a polite, chilling smile. You know what I said softly, picking up my wineglass. You are absolutely right. I have been very selfish. I apologize for my reaction. I will make sure everything is taken care of. Understood. I will prepare the kitchen for your very important guests. My father grunted in approval, satisfied that he had easily put me in my place. My mother rolled her eyes and went back to eating her salad. Trent and Jasmine clinked their glasses together, celebrating their impending $50 million victory. They went right back to discussing their luxurious plans, completely ignoring my existence. They had no idea that they had just sealed their own fate. I excused myself from the dining table shortly after dessert was served. My parents and Trent were too busy discussing the exclusive country clubs they planned to visit with Harrison Cole to even notice me leaving the room. Walking up the grand, sweeping staircase of my own house, I felt an incredible sense of clarity. The heavy burden of familial obligation I had carried for a decade simply vanished. They wanted a servant, but they were about to get a very harsh reality check. I pulled my vintage designer carry-on from my closet. I packed light. Designer swimwear, a few silk evening dresses, my laptop, and my digital access keys. I did not need much for a tropical getaway. I pulled out my phone and accessed my private concierge application. Within minutes, a black car was scheduled to arrive at the estate service entrance at exactly midnight. Next, I opened the local grocer application on my tablet. Trent had casually demanded 3 meals a day for 30 billionaires, assuming the refrigerators were magically stocked with premium ingredients. I had actually placed a massive order days ago for my own private holiday hosting. Wagyu beef, fresh truffles, organic produce, imported caviar, and vintage champagne. With a simple tap on my screen, I canceled the entire $10,000 delivery. The only thing left in the industrial freezer was a rock-hard discount turkey my mother had brought from a budget supermarket, claiming she wanted to make a traditional soup later in the week. At midnight, the house was completely silent. The snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the Aspen Mountains in deep white. I walked down to the massive chef kitchen. The marble island gleamed under the dim security lights. I pulled a neon yellow sticky note from a drawer and grabbed a pen. I wrote my message in clear, sharp letters. The kitchen is all yours, Trent. Have fun serving the VIPs. I pressed the note firmly onto the stainless steel refrigerator door. The black SUV was waiting silently at the back gate. The driver loaded my bag, and I climbed into the heated leather seat. As we drove down the mountain toward the private airfield, I looked back at the sprawling estate one last time. It was a beautiful property, but the people inside had turned it into a toxic prison. I was finally locking the door behind me. 2 hours later, I was leaning back in the plush seat of a first-class cabin, sipping a chilled mimosa as the plane taxied down the runway. Next stop, Hawaii. The tropical sun of Maui was a brilliant, blinding gold. The air smelled of salt and plumeria blossoms. I stretched out on a plush white lounger inside my private beachfront cabana, listening to the rhythmic crashing of the Pacific Ocean. A resort attendant placed a fresh tropical cocktail on the small table beside me. It was 9 in the morning local time, which meant it was approaching early afternoon in Aspen. Trent's guests were scheduled to arrive very soon. I took a slow sip of my drink, enjoying the sweet pineapple and rum. Then I picked up my phone and disabled airplane mode. The device immediately froze. It vibrated violently in my hand for nearly 2 full minutes as a barrage of missed calls, voicemails, and urgent text messages flooded the screen. My family group chat was an absolute war zone. I opened the application and scrolled to the top of the morning panic. Trent had started at 8 in the morning. Where the hell are you? I need breakfast prepared for Jasmine and myself before the guests arrive. An hour later, the tone shifted from arrogant expectation to sheer panic. Where is the Wagyu beef? Where is the caviar? The VIPs arrive in 4 hours and the refrigerator is completely empty. What is this note? My mother had chimed in shortly after her messages dripping with toxic authority. Naomi, this is not funny. Get back to the house right now. You are embarrassing your brother. If you do not walk through that front door in the next 10 minutes, you are completely cut out of this family. You will be dead to us. I laughed out loud. The sound caught the attention of a passing seagull, but I could not contain my amusement. Cut out of the family. They were threatening to cut me off while standing inside my house, breathing my heated air, relying on my labor. I tapped the screen and typed my single definitive response. Currently tanning in Maui. Order Uber Eats. I hit send, then immediately muted the group chat and blocked their incoming calls. Let them scream into the void. But I was not entirely disconnected from the drama. I wanted to see the exact moment my perfect arrogant brother realized he was entirely incompetent. I picked up my iPad and opened my custom smart home application. The software gave me complete administrative access to the entire Aspen estate, including the discrete indoor security cameras I had installed for property management purposes. I tapped the kitchen feed. The high-definition video loaded instantly. The kitchen was in a state of absolute glorious chaos. Trent was pacing back and forth across the marble floors, his face flushed a deep, panicked red. He was shouting into his phone, desperately trying to call every luxury catering service in Aspen, but it was 2 days before Christmas. No one was available. Jasmine stood near the center island, wearing a silk designer robe, staring in horror at the massive industrial sink. Inside the sink sat the rock-hard discount turkey my mother had purchased. Jasmine, who came from a highly educated Atlanta family and fancied herself a high society elite, had likely never cooked a meal from scratch in her entire life. She was attempting to pry the thick plastic wrapping off the frozen bird with a silver butter knife. Through the crisp audio feed, I heard a sharp snap, followed by a piercing shriek. Jasmine dropped the knife and clutched her hand. "My nail," she screamed, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "I broke my acrylic nail. This bird is practically made of concrete. Trent, do something right now." Trent threw his phone onto the counter in severe frustration. "What do you want me to do?" "Jasmine, I am a finance broker, not a chef." Naomi took all the food. "Harrison Cole is going to be here in less than 2 hours with 29 other billionaires, expecting a luxury culinary experience, and all I have is a frozen turkey and a bag of generic flour." My mother rushed into the frame, her hair in hot rollers, looking frantically between her golden child and her weeping daughter-in-law. "Do not yell at your wife, Trent. This is all Naomi's fault. She is a bitter, jealous, unstable girl who wants to see you fail. We will just tell Mr. Cole that the private chef had a family emergency. We can boil some pasta. Billionaires like rustic, authentic Italian food, right?" I watched Trent bury his face in his hands, boiling cheap, dry pasta for Harrison Cole. It was the ultimate display of their complete lack of substance. They had spent their entire lives pretending to be royalty, looking down on me for actually working for a living. Now, stripped of my financial support and my physical labor, they were entirely helpless. They were 3 adults paralyzed by a frozen turkey and their own massive egos. I locked the iPad screen and leaned back into my cabana lounger. The Hawaiian breeze was warm and perfect. The show was just beginning, and I had the absolute best seat in the house. A few hours later, the motion alert on my tablet pinged loudly over the sound of the ocean waves. I picked up the screen and watched as a fleet of black luxury sport utility vehicles pulled up the snow-covered driveway of the Aspen estate. Harrison Cole stepped out of the lead vehicle. He was a 50-year-old ruthless billionaire investor known throughout the industry for his extremely high standards and lack of patience. He wore a tailored cashmere overcoat and was flanked by an entourage of nearly 30 executives and partners. Trent practically sprinted to the front custom oak door to greet them. He puffed out his chest and threw his shoulders back in a pathetic, rehearsed imitation of old money confidence. He welcomed the billionaire into the massive foyer, spreading his arms wide and bragging about the vaulted ceilings and the imported Italian marble floors as if he had personally selected them. Harrison looked around the grand space, appearing mildly impressed before handing his heavy winter coat to my mother. Brenda was desperately trying to play the role of a gracious, wealthy hostess, smiling so hard her face looked strained. Harrison turned back to my brother and asked the exact question I knew was coming. He inquired about the Michelin star private chef Trent had promised would be preparing their extravagant welcome dinner. Trent did not even hesitate. He put on a theatrical face of deep faux concern. "I apologize, Harrison," Trent said smoothly, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "My sister was supposed to be handling the culinary arrangements this week, but she is unfortunately suffering from a severe mental breakdown. She is terribly unstable and abruptly abandoned her post this morning. We are dealing with her psychiatric episode as best we can, but we will have a rustic, authentic Italian meal prepared for you shortly." Hearing him weaponize mental health to cover his own sheer incompetence made my blood run ice cold. My eyes narrowed behind my sunglasses. The tropical heat of Maui suddenly felt completely irrelevant. The gloves were officially off. He wanted to play games with my reputation in front of my own industry peers. I was going to make him deeply regret ever speaking my name. I opened the smart home application and navigated to the integrated sound system. The estate had massive concert-quality speakers hidden seamlessly in the ceilings of every single room. Through the live camera feed, I watched Trent guide Harrison into the main living room, gesturing proudly toward the roaring stone fireplace. Trent picked up a heavy crystal decanter filled with a $500 vintage scotch, preparing to pour Harrison a welcoming drink. I set the master volume slider to absolute maximum. I selected a highly energetic, incredibly loud pop song from my digital library and hit play. The opening screeching electronic notes blasted through the living room with the physical force of a sonic boom. The walls literally shook from the bass. Trent jumped so violently that his arm jerked forward. He launched the heavy crystal decanter straight ahead. The expensive brown liquor splashed directly onto Harrison Cole's pristine custom suede loafers. I let the chaotic music deafen them for exactly 5 seconds before I hit the stop button. Dead silence rushed back into the room, broken only by the sound of dripping alcohol. Harrison was staring down at his ruined shoes, his jaw visibly tight with pure unadulterated rage. Trent was stammering incoherently, his hands shaking as he dropped to his knees and tried to wipe the billionaire's shoes with a flimsy cocktail napkin. Right at that disastrous moment, Jasmine rushed into the room carrying a silver tray. Sitting on the tray was a sad pile of store-bought, heavily burnt cookies that she had clearly destroyed in the industrial oven. She froze, staring at her husband groveling on the floor. The entire illusion of high society luxury was completely shattered in less than a minute. An hour later, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I recognized the Atlanta area code. I answered the call, keeping my breathing perfectly steady. Jasmine spoke entirely, dropping her usual arrogant tone and attempting to use a manipulative, sisterly voice. "Naomi," she sighed softly into the receiver. "You are ruining your brother's $50 million deal. I know you are jealous of his success, but as a black woman, I know how hard my husband has to work in this finance industry to be taken seriously by men like Harrison. Do not be the bitter relative pulling him down. You need to come back here and fix this mess before he loses everything." I let out a soft, genuine laugh. "Jasmine," I said, keeping my voice incredibly level and completely devoid of emotion. "You married a complete fraud. He has absolutely no money. He has massive credit card debt that I recently stopped paying off for him. In fact, you are standing inside my house right now." Jasmine scoffed loudly, a harsh sound of pure disbelief. "You are delusional, Naomi. Trent warned me you were having an episode, but claiming you own a $10 million Aspen estate is pathetic. Stop lying to yourself and get back here to do your job." I did not raise my voice. I did not try to convince her. I simply gave her a calm instruction. "Walk over to the digital thermostat in the hallway, Jasmine. Watch the screen closely." I hung up the phone without waiting for her reply. Since she refused to believe the truth of my words, I needed to show her exactly who held the power in that house. I opened my property management portal and logged directly into the estate's central server. First, I navigated to the network settings. I changed the wireless internet network name to Trent is broke and altered the password to something randomly generated, instantly kicking all 30 billionaires and my entire family off the local network. Aspen had notoriously terrible cellular reception in that specific valley, meaning they were now entirely cut off from the outside world. Next, I accessed the smart climate control system. I dropped the water heater temperature in the guest wing to freezing. Then I lowered the ambient heating in the main living areas to 50 degrees. Through the security cameras, I watched the immediate fallout. VIP guests began stepping out of their assigned bedrooms, clutching towels and shivering, complaining loudly to my panicking parents about ice-cold showers and no internet connection. Trent was sweating profusely through his cashmere sweater, running his hands over his face as Harrison Cole demanded to know what kind of amateur operation he was running. The entire house was descending into a freezing, disconnected nightmare, and I simply ordered another cocktail. The chaos inside the Aspen estate was rapidly spiraling out of control, and Trent was running out of options. Through the security camera feeds on my tablet, I watched my brother pace the icy hallway outside the main living room. Harrison Cole was loudly threatening to pull his $50 million investment if a proper dinner was not served within the hour. The billionaire was furious about the freezing temperatures and the ruined suede shoes. Trent was completely desperate. His own bank accounts were vastly overdrawn, and his personal credit cards had been declined for weeks. He had no way to fix this disaster on his own. I switched my iPad view to the hidden nanny camera located inside my master bedroom suite. The heavy oak door swung open and Trent crept inside. He was panting, his eyes darting around the pristine space like a cornered animal. He began tearing through my personal belongings without a shred of respect. He ripped open my dresser drawers, tossing my expensive silk scarves and designer jewelry boxes carelessly onto the hardwood floor. He was frantically searching for cash, a checkbook, or anything he could pawn to save his disastrous evening. He cursed my name under his breath, muttering about how ungrateful and selfish I was, while he actively ransacked my private sanctuary. I zoomed in on the high-definition feed just as he pulled open the bottom drawer of my mahogany desk. There it was, the bait. Resting perfectly in the center of the velvet-lined drawer was a sleek, heavy-metal corporate black card. It clearly bore the name Apex Luxury Management. I had intentionally left it behind, knowing his sheer desperation and staggering sense of entitlement would override any basic legal logic. Trent grabbed the card, his face lighting up with a greedy, triumphant smile. The panic vanished from his eyes, instantly replaced by his usual unearned arrogance. He pulled out his phone and immediately dialed a local five-star Aspen catering company. I turned up the audio feed to hear his end of the conversation perfectly. "Yes, this is Trent Foster." He lied smoothly into the receiver, puffing out his chest even though he was alone in the room. "I need an emergency luxury catering package delivered to my estate immediately. I am hosting Harrison Cole and a large party of VIPs. Send your best team. I want beluga caviar white truffles, butter poached lobster tails, and Wagyu tomahawk steaks. The absolute works. Charge it to this corporate account." He rattled off the 16-digit number without a single ounce of hesitation. He confidently authorized a $15,000 charge. He genuinely believed he was untouchable. He rationalized that I would never dare involve the authorities out of some twisted sense of family loyalty. He thought I would just absorb the massive financial hit like I had always done in the past, quietly paying for his luxurious lifestyle to keep the peace. He was dead wrong. 2,000 miles away in Maui, a bright red notification flashed across my phone screen. Apex Luxury Management Fraud Alert. Unauthorized charge of $15,000 pending. I did not hit the decline button. I did not freeze the account right away. Instead, I sat back against the plush cushions of my cabana, listening to the gentle crash of the Pacific Ocean, and waited. I waited for exactly 20 minutes. I needed the transaction to fully clear the banking system. I needed the catering company to begin preparing the food and officially process the payment. Once that money changed hands, the financial crime would become an undeniable, legally binding felony. There would be no walking it back. There would be no claiming it was just a misunderstanding. The moment the notification changed from pending to approved, I took immediate action. I tapped the Report Stolen button on my banking application, instantly freezing the account and flagging the transaction. Then I dialed the direct line to the Aspen Police Department. A dispatcher answered on the second ring. Aspen Police, what is your emergency? Hello, I said, keeping my voice incredibly professional, sharp, and completely devoid of panic. My name is Naomi Foster. I am the founder and CEO of Apex Luxury Management. An unauthorized $15,000 charge was just processed on a stolen corporate credit card. The fraudulent transaction was placed from my private residence, and the thief is currently inside the property. The dispatcher asked for the address. I recited the location of the Aspen estate clearly. Are you currently at the residence, ma'am? The dispatcher asked. No, I am out of state, I replied smoothly. But I have live security footage of the suspect. He is my brother Trent Foster. He does not have permission to be in my master suite, and he absolutely does not have authorization to use my corporate assets. He is hosting a large gathering at my home against my rules. I need officers dispatched to my address immediately to make a felony arrest for credit card fraud and theft. We are sending units to the location right now, the dispatcher confirmed. I thanked her and ended the call. I took another slow sip of my cocktail, the sweet taste of pineapple mixing perfectly with the absolute thrill of impending justice. Trent wanted to play the role of a wealthy, elite host. He was about to find out exactly how much that illusion cost when the bill came due in handcuffs. As the sun dipped below the snow-capped peaks of Aspen, the high-definition camera feed on my tablet showed a fleet of crisp white vans rolling up the heated driveway of the estate. The vehicles bore the elegant silver logo of the most exclusive high-end culinary service in the entire state of Colorado. I watched from my cabana in Maui as teams of professional chefs and waitstaff in pristine white coats poured out of the vans. They carried massive silver cloches, heavy coolers packed with dry ice, and wooden crates overflowing with premium ingredients. Inside the freezing, chaotic house, the tension instantly evaporated. My mother Brenda clutched her chest and let out a massive sigh of relief, slumping against the marble kitchen island. Trent smoothed down his cashmere sweater, taking a deep breath as his unearned arrogance returned in full force. Jasmine tossed her ruined acrylic nail into the garbage can and quickly pulled a compact mirror from her pocket to reapply her designer lipstick. They had been saved from total humiliation, or so they thought. The professional chefs immediately took over the kitchen, working with military precision. Within 90 minutes, the dining room was completely transformed. The 30 billionaires were seated around the massive mahogany table, the finest crystal glasses sparkling under the dim chandelier light. The temperature in the house was still uncomfortably low, but the promise of a hot, luxurious meal seemed to pacify the angry guests. Trent stood at the head of the table holding a glass of vintage champagne. He wove a masterful, sickening lie. He puffed out his chest and looked directly at Harrison Cole, boasting loudly about his elite local network. He claimed he had simply pulled a few strings with his personal contacts to have this Michelin-quality feast delivered on such incredibly short notice. He spoke as if he owned the entire town. Harrison gave a curt, approving nod, finally looking somewhat appeased after the earlier acoustic assault and the freezing showers. Jasmine beamed from her seat, looking down her nose at the serving staff fully immersed in her delusion of absolute grandeur. The servers began bringing out the first course. The aroma of butter, poached lobster tails, shaved white truffles, and imported beluga caviar filled the grand dining room. It was a flawless presentation of extreme wealth. Harrison Cole picked up his heavy silver fork. He leaned forward, just about to take his very first bite of the extravagant meal. Right at that exact second, bright flashing red and blue lights suddenly bounced off the floor-to-ceiling glass windows. The harsh strobe-like glare cut right through the warm, ambient lighting of the dining room, illuminating the falling snow outside. The sharp, piercing wail of police sirens echoed up the mountain, growing deafeningly loud as they approached the front gates. Two Aspen Police Department cruisers skidded to a halt right in front of the main entrance, aggressively blocking the catering vans in the driveway. The sound of heavy boots stomping up the stone steps echoed through the foyer. The heavy oak front door swung open. Two uniformed police officers strode directly into the house, their hands resting firmly on their utility belts. The dining room went dead silent. 30 billionaires froze in place, their forks suspended in midair. Harrison Cole narrowed his eyes slowly, lowering his piece of lobster back onto the porcelain plate. Trent's face drained of all color, turning an absolute sickly shade of white. His champagne glass shook violently in his hand. Brenda gasped aloud, dropping her linen napkin onto the floor. Jasmine stared at the officers, her smug smile completely vanishing. The lead officer stepped into the dining room, his boots loud against the hardwood floor. His stern gaze swept over the shocked, wealthy guests, before locking dead onto my brother. "Good evening," the officer said, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "We are looking for the individual who just authorized a $15,000 catering charge on an Apex Luxury Management corporate card ending in 8899. We are responding to an active felony theft report." Trent swallowed hard. He put his empty hands up, offering a shaky, pathetic laugh as he tried to play it off in front of his wealthy investors. "Officers, officers, please lower your voices," Trent stammered, stepping away from the head of the table. "There is a massive misunderstanding here. I am the owner of this estate. That credit card belongs to my sister. This is just a simple family dispute over dinner expenses. She is just being dramatic. There is absolutely no need for law enforcement to be involved." The officer did not smile. He did not lower his voice. He pulled a digital tablet from his belt and looked at the screen. "Sir, public records indicate that this property is solely owned by Naomi Foster. You are not on the deed. You are a guest here. Furthermore, the credit card in question does not belong to a family member. It belongs to a registered corporation. The chief executive officer of that corporation has officially reported the card stolen. You have committed felony credit card fraud across state lines. Step away from the table and keep your hands where I can see them." A collective gasp rippled through the 30 VIP guests. They began murmuring to each other, shooting disgusted looks at Trent. Jasmine stared at her husband in absolute horror as the illusion of his massive wealth shattered before her very eyes. He did not own the house. He did not own the food they were about to eat. He was a broke fraud who had just stolen from his own sister. Brenda started crying, burying her face in her hands. The luxurious elite dinner party had instantly turned into an active crime scene, and I watched every single glorious second of it from my beach cabana. The lead police officer pulled a radio from his belt and requested a secure line to dispatch. The brutal reality of the situation was crushing Trent. He fell back against the edge of the dining table, his breathing shallow and rapid. Jasmine stood frozen, staring at the man she married as if he were a complete stranger. The extravagant feast sat untouched on the table, the scent of truffles and roasted meats mocking the absolute disaster unfolding in the room. Officer Trent pleaded, his voice cracking into a high-pitched squeak. "You have to let me call her. I can clear this up right now. It is a massive misunderstanding. She will tell you to drop the charges. Let me FaceTime her. We can connect it to the main television so you can see and hear her perfectly." The officer crossed his arms and nodded once. "Make the call, but be advised this is an active investigation. Do not attempt to coach the victim." Trent's hands were shaking violently as he pulled out his phone. He frantically navigated to the smart home casting application, linking his phone screen to the massive 85-inch television mounted above the stone fireplace in the adjoining living room. He tapped my name and initiated a video call. I had been waiting for this exact moment. I adjusted my silk beach cover-up, smoothed my hair, and accepted the incoming call. The giant screen in the Aspen living room flickered to life. The high-definition display illuminated the freezing, panicked room with the bright golden sunshine of the Hawaiian coast. I sat elegantly in my private cabana, the crystal blue Pacific Ocean rolling gently in the background behind me. I held a fresh, brightly colored cocktail in my hand. I looked incredibly relaxed, radiant, and entirely unbothered. The visual contrast between my tropical paradise and their icy, chaotic nightmare was absolute cinematic perfection. Naomi Trent shouted, lunging toward the television screen. Naomi, please, tell these officers that I had permission to use the corporate card. Tell them it was just a sibling miscommunication. You have to call them off right now. They are threatening to arrest me for a felony. My father pushed his way to the front of the crowd, completely abandoning his pride. He stared up at the massive screen, his face twisted in desperate panic. Naomi, please stop this nonsense immediately. You are going to send your own brother to prison over a dinner party. Tell the police you authorized the transaction. Do not destroy this family over a petty grudge. My mother pushed past Jasmine, tears streaming down her perfectly contoured face. She clasped her hands together, begging me in front of 30 billionaires. Naomi, I am begging you. We are your parents. He is your blood. Do not do this to him. Tell them it was a mistake. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my cocktail. I looked down at the camera, my expression completely devoid of sympathy. The entire room of elite guests held their collective breath, waiting for my response. You ordered me to be a servant in my own house, I said, my voice echoing crisply through the surround sound speakers. You told 30 important business partners that I was suffering from a severe mental breakdown to cover up your own pathetic incompetence. You insulted my life, my career, and my independence. You have spent the last 10 years treating me like a disposable asset while I secretly paid your debts and kept you out of prison. I leaned slightly forward, staring directly into Trent's terrified eyes. I do not authorize thieves to use my corporate accounts. I do not authorize squatters to host fraudulent dinner parties on my property. Officers, if you can hear me, I am the legal owner of that estate and the chief executive officer of Apex Luxury Management. I am pressing full criminal charges against Trent Foster for felony credit card fraud. Arrest him. A collective gasp swept through the VIP crowd. Trent let out a strangled cry and collapsed to his knees right in front of the television. He grabbed his hair, sobbing uncontrollably. The police officers stepped forward, pulling handcuffs from their belts. Wait! A deep, authoritative voice cut through the chaos of the room. The crowd of wealthy investors parted immediately. Billionaire Harrison Cole stepped forward, his ruined suede shoes stepping over the spilled champagne on the hardwood floor. He walked directly up to the television screen, adjusting his expensive glasses as he squinted at the high-definition feed. He ignored the police. He ignored my sobbing parents. He ignored Trent groveling on the floor. Naomi Harrison asked, his voice filled with genuine shock and sudden recognition. Is that Naomi Foster of Apex Luxury? I smiled warmly, my entire demeanor shifting from cold detachment to absolute professional grace. Good evening, Mr. Cole. It is a pleasure to see you again, although I am deeply sorry my property management firm could not host you under better circumstances. I would have ensured the heating and internet were functioning perfectly for your stay. Harrison stood perfectly still, his sharp mind connecting the dots at lightning speed. You own this estate? He asked, pointing a finger at the vaulted ceiling. I purchased it 3 years ago, I confirmed smoothly. The man currently crying on my living room floor is my brother. He is a squatter. He owns absolutely nothing. He has no assets, no elite connections, and zero capital. He is a fraud who just stole $15,000 from my company because he could not afford to feed you. Harrison Cole turned around very slowly. He looked down at Trent. The billionaire's face was a mask of pure, terrifying disgust. Trent reached a shaking hand toward the investor. Harrison, please, I can explain everything. I am securing the capital. The $50 million deal is still solid. Just give me a chance to fix this. You dragged me into a felony crime scene, Harrison said, his voice dangerously quiet. You lied about your assets. You stole from your own sister to feed me. And worst of all, you tried to hustle me. Harrison turned back to the screen. Naomi, he said respectfully. Apex Luxury Management is the firm I hired to audit his background before finalizing this investment. I was relying on your team to verify his portfolio. I nodded. And my team would have flagged him as a complete financial liability by Monday morning, Mr. Cole. I simply expedited the process for you. Harrison gave a short, sharp laugh. He turned back to the room and signaled his entourage. The deal is dead, Harrison announced loudly. Pack your bags. We are leaving this circus immediately. The 30 billionaires did not hesitate. They turned in unison, leaving the lavish dinner untouched on the table, and marched toward the guest wing to gather their belongings. Trent screamed, burying his face in the floorboards as his entire future evaporated in a matter of seconds. The lead police officer grabbed Trent by the arms, hauling him up roughly and slamming him against the wall to secure the metal handcuffs around his wrists. Jasmine, who had been completely silent the entire time, finally moved. She walked up to Trent as the officer read him his Miranda rights. She looked at her husband with absolute revulsion. She pulled the massive diamond engagement ring off her finger. A ring I now knew was purchased on one of my credit cards. She threw it directly at Trent's chest. It bounced off his sweater and hit the floor with a hollow ping. She turned her back on him and walked out the front door, following the billionaires into the freezing snow. My parents were left standing alone in the massive cold room, watching their golden child being dragged out the front door by the police. They were completely broken, stripped of their pride, their false wealth, and their dignity. I watched the final moments of their destruction through the screen, took a long sip of my mimosa, and prepared to deliver the final crushing blow. I disconnected the video call, the screen in the Aspen living room going black. I leaned back into my lounge chair, taking a slow, deep breath of the warm Hawaiian air. The absolute silence that followed the chaos was incredibly satisfying. I had spent 10 years allowing my family to tear me down, to dictate my worth, and to use my success to fund their delusional fantasies. In the span of a single evening, I had completely destroyed their toxic empire. I had taken back my life, my property, and my self-respect. My phone rang. The caller ID displayed Harrison Cole's personal number. I answered on the first ring, my voice smooth and professional. Good evening again, Mr. Cole. I trust your departure from the estate was handled smoothly. Naomi Harrison said, his voice surprisingly calm compared to the rage he had displayed just an hour ago. I must admit that was one of the most dramatic exits from a dinner party I have ever made. You have quite the flair for a grand finale. I smiled, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. I prefer to think of it as aggressive property management, Mr. Cole. I apologize again for the inconvenience to you and your guests. If I had known my brother was attempting to leverage my corporate assets for his own gain, I would have intervened much sooner. You handled it exactly as you should have, Harrison replied. A lesser CEO would have tried to cover it up to save their family embarrassment. You cut the dead weight immediately. I respect that. It shows a level of ruthlessness and integrity that is exceedingly rare in this industry. He paused for a moment, and I could hear the sound of a car engine in the background. My team was already preparing to reject Trent's investment proposal based on the preliminary audit your firm submitted. Harrison continued. He was highly leveraged, his assets were entirely fabricated, and his professional network was non-existent. Tonight simply confirmed our suspicions. But I am not calling to discuss your fraudulent brother. I sat up, slightly intrigued by his shift in tone. What can I do for you, Mr. Cole? I am currently expanding my global real estate portfolio, Harrison explained. I have acquired several high-yield luxury properties in Europe and the Middle East over the past 6 months. I need a property management firm with absolute discretion, aggressive oversight, and a CEO who does not tolerate incompetence. Your performance tonight convinced me that Apex Luxury Management is the exact firm I am looking for. I want to offer you an exclusive contract to manage the entire portfolio. The offer was staggering. It was the kind of multi-million-dollar contract that would elevate my company from a highly successful national firm to a dominant global player. It was the exact type of opportunity Trent had been desperately trying to secure, and Harrison was handing it directly to me. I would be incredibly honored to review the portfolio, Mr. Cole, I said, keeping my excitement carefully contained. I will have my legal team draft a preliminary proposal by Monday morning. We can schedule a formal meeting to discuss the terms once I return to the mainland. Excellent, Harrison said, sounding genuinely pleased. Enjoy your vacation, Naomi. You have certainly earned it. I ended the call and placed my phone on the table. The Hawaiian sun was dipping below the horizon, casting a warm, golden glow across the ocean. I had won. I had not just survived my family's toxic abuse. I had completely conquered it. I had proven that I did not need their validation, their fake support, or their conditional love. A new notification popped up on my screen. It was an email from my lead security contractor back in Aspen. He had attached a brief, highly satisfying report. The eviction notice had been formally served to Richard and Brenda. They had been given 30 days to vacate the property. Trent was currently being processed at the county jail for felony credit card fraud. Jasmine had officially filed for an emergency annulment citing gross financial misrepresentation. The entire false reality they had built their lives upon had crumbled into dust. I stood up from my lounge chair and walked toward the edge of the beach. The cool water washed over my feet. For years, my family had tried to convince me that I was a failure because I did not fit into their superficial, materialistic mold. They had demanded that I serve them, that I shrink myself to make their own pathetic lives seem larger. But I had refused to break. I had taken their cruelty and used it as fuel to build my own empire. Sometimes serving your toxic family means serving them exactly what they deserve. The absolute unvarnished truth. It means refusing to protect them from the consequences of their own actions. It means walking away from the table when the only thing on the menu is abuse. I had finally cut the cord, and the freedom I felt was intoxicating. I was no longer the quiet, obedient daughter willing to clean up their messes. I was Naomi Foster, the CEO of my own life, and I was just getting started. The deafening silence returning to the Aspen living room was the sweetest sound I had ever experienced. Through the high-definition camera feed on my tablet, I watched the immediate aftermath of my 5-second auditory assault. Trent was frozen in a half-crouch, the $500 vintage scotch pooling around Harrison Cole's pristine custom suede loafers. Harrison's face was a mask of cold fury. Before Trent could even stammer out a pathetic apology, Jasmine practically threw herself into the frame. She was holding a silver serving tray, her hands shaking slightly as she presented a sad, pathetic mound of store-bought cookies that were burnt to an absolute crisp. The illusion of high society luxury evaporated right there on my screen. I locked my tablet, took a long sip of my iced mimosa, and let the Hawaiian sun warm my skin. They were drowning, and I was not throwing them a life vest. Several hours passed. The sun climbed higher over the Pacific Ocean, casting a brilliant golden light across the beach. My phone buzzed on the glass table next to my lounger. It was an unknown number, but the area code was Atlanta. I knew exactly who it was. I swiped the screen and brought the phone to my ear, remaining completely silent. Naomi Jasmine sighed softly into the receiver. Gone was the arrogant, condescending tone she had used at the dinner table 2 nights ago. She was attempting to use a manipulative, sisterly voice, dripping with fake empathy. Naomi, please talk to me. We need to fix this. You are ruining your brother's $50 million deal. I did not interrupt her. I let her dig her own grave. I know you are jealous of his success. Jasmine continued, her voice taking on a hushed, conspiratorial tone. But as a Black woman, I know exactly how hard my husband has to work in this finance industry to be taken seriously by men like Harrison Cole. He has to work twice as hard to prove he belongs in that room. You are his sister. You should be his biggest supporter, not the bitter relative pulling him down. You need to come back here and fix this mess before he loses everything he has built. I let out a soft, genuine laugh. It was not a laugh of cruelty, but one of pure, unadulterated disbelief at the magnitude of Trent's deception. Jasmine, I said, keeping my voice incredibly level and completely devoid of emotion. You married a complete fraud. He has absolutely no money. Jasmine gasped, a sharp intake of breath echoing over the line. Excuse me. He is not a high society heir, I stated clearly. He has massive 6-figure credit card debt that I recently stopped paying off for him. He leases those sports cars under my corporate accounts without my authorization. In fact, you are standing inside my house right now. Jasmine scoffed loudly, a harsh sound of pure disbelief. You are delusional, Naomi. Trent warned me you were having a mental episode, but claiming you own a $10 million Aspen estate is pathetic. Stop lying to yourself and get back here to do your job." I did not raise my voice. I did not try to convince her. I simply gave her a calm instruction. "Walk over to the digital thermostat in the main hallway, Jasmine. Watch the screen closely." I hung up the phone without waiting for her reply. Since she refused to believe the truth of my words, I needed to show her exactly who held the power in that house. I opened my property management portal and logged directly into the estate's central server. First, I navigated to the network settings. Trent and his VIP guests were relying on the estate's high-speed fiber optic connection to conduct their business and communicate with the outside world. I changed the wireless internet network name to Trent is Broke 2026 and altered the master password to a randomly generated string of characters. I instantly kicked all 30 billionaires, my parents Jasmine and my brother, off the local network. Aspen had notoriously terrible cellular reception in that specific valley, meaning they were now entirely cut off from the outside world. They could not send an email, make a trade, or even check the weather. Next, I accessed the smart climate control system. I navigated to the plumbing settings and dropped the massive industrial water heater temperature in the guest wing to freezing. Then I lowered the ambient heating in the main living areas from a comfortable 72 degrees down to a bone-chilling 50 degrees. Through the security cameras, I watched the immediate fallout. VIP guests began stepping out of their assigned bedrooms, clutching thin towels and shivering violently. They were complaining loudly to my panicking parents about ice-cold showers and having absolutely zero internet connection. Trent was sweating profusely through his cashmere sweater, running his hands over his face as Harrison Cole demanded to know what kind of amateur operation he was running. The entire house was descending into a freezing, disconnected nightmare. I switched the camera angle to the main hallway. Jasmine stood there staring in absolute horror at the digital thermostat on the wall as the temperature reading plummeted before her very eyes. She pulled out her smartphone, frantically tapping the screen, desperately searching for a wireless signal, only to be greeted by the humiliating network name I had just created. She stared at her screen, her jaw dropping slightly as the reality of my words began to sink in. She was not standing in her wealthy husband's family estate. She was standing in a freezing house completely controlled by the sister-in-law she had just insulted. I leaned back against the plush cushions of my cabana. The Hawaiian breeze was warm and perfect. My brother wanted to play the role of a wealthy elite host, and his wife wanted to play the gracious socialite. Now stripped of my financial support and my digital infrastructure, they were entirely helpless. The grand illusion was breaking apart piece by piece, and I had the absolute best seat in the house to watch it all crumble. The grand illusion was breaking apart piece by piece, and I had the absolute best seat in the house to watch it all crumble. I tapped the screen of my tablet, switching the camera view from the main hallway directly to the expansive guest wing corridor. This was where Trent had housed his most important investors, placing Harrison Cole in the premier suite at the end of the hall. I leaned closer to the high-definition display, watching the digital temperature gauge on the corner of the camera feed steadily drop into the low 50s. The fallout was instantaneous and spectacularly chaotic. The heavy oak doors of the guest suites began to swing open one by one. Highly influential venture capitalists, men and women who were accustomed to the absolute pinnacle of luxury, stepped out into the freezing corridor. They were clutching plush white towels and thick bathrobes tightly around their shivering bodies. Their wet hair clung to their faces, and I could see their breath forming small white clouds in the frigid indoor air. One of the executives, a tall man who managed a massive hedge fund in New York, marched into the hallway dripping wet and furious. He was rubbing his arms vigorously. "What in the world is going on with the plumbing?" he shouted down the empty corridor. "The water in my shower just turned to absolute ice mid-lather. I cannot even feel my fingers." A woman from a prominent tech firm stepped out of the adjacent suite wrapped in two heavy duvets. She held her smartphone up in the air, frantically waving it back and forth, as if trying to catch a physical signal. Forget the water, she complained loudly, her teeth visibly chattering on the audio feed. The internet is completely down. I have been trying to execute a critical trade for the last 10 minutes. I have zero cellular service in this valley, and the estate wireless network has completely vanished from my settings. The grumbling quickly escalated into an absolute uproar. 30 freezing, disconnected billionaires began migrating down the grand staircase toward the main living room, demanding immediate answers. I switched my camera feed back to the main floor. Trent was standing near the massive stone fireplace, desperately trying to get a fire going with shaking hands. Despite the plunging temperature in the room, sweat was pouring down his forehead. Dark, humiliating sweat stains were blooming under the arms of his expensive cashmere sweater. He wiped his brow with the back of his trembling hand, his eyes darting wildly around the room as the angry mob of investors descended upon him. Harrison Cole led the charge. The billionaire investor did not look like a man ready to hand over $50 million. He looked like a man ready to initiate a hostile takeover. He was fully dressed in his tailored suit, but he had pulled a thick wool scarf tightly around his neck. Trent Harrison barked, his deep voice slicing through the complaints of the other guests. Explain this amateur operation immediately. My suite feels like a meat locker, the hot water is entirely non-existent, and my chief financial officer just informed me that our secure network connection has been completely severed. We are completely in the dark. Fix this right now. It's right. Trent flinched as if he had been physically struck. He threw his hands up in a placating gesture, flashing a desperate, sickly smile. Harrison, please, I sincerely apologize. This is just a minor technical glitch. You know how unpredictable the infrastructure can be up here in the mountains during a winter storm. The weather must have knocked out the main servers. I will have my estate management team resolve this immediately. It is not the weather, a sharp voice interrupted. The camera panned slightly as Jasmine pushed her way to the front of the crowd. She was clutching her silk robe tightly around her waist, her eyes wide with a terrifying realization. She walked straight up to her husband and shoved her smartphone directly into his chest. Look at the available networks, Trent Jasmine demanded, her voice rising in pitch. The internet is not down. The network was deliberately changed. Look at the name. Trent snatched the phone from her hands. I zoomed the camera in perfectly to catch the exact moment his eyes locked onto the screen. His jaw dropped. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost. Staring back at him in bold letters was the only available wireless network in the entire house. Trent is broke 2026. What is the meaning of this? Harrison Cole demanded, stepping closer to read the screen over Trent's shoulder. The billionaire's eyes narrowed dangerously. Trent is broke. Is this some kind of sick joke, Foster? Are you playing games with my time and my money? No, absolutely not, Trent stammered. His voice cracked, betraying his absolute panic. He shoved the phone back into Jasmine's hands. It is a prank. My sister is having a severe mental breakdown, remember? She must have hacked into the router before she left. She is incredibly unstable and bitter. I will go down to the server room right now and manually reset the entire system. Just give me 10 minutes, Harrison. I promise I will have the heat and the internet fully restored. My father, Richard, rushed into the living room carrying an armful of spare blankets. He began passing them out to the shivering billionaires, offering pathetic, groveling apologies with every step. My mother followed closely behind him, wringing her hands and trying to offer the guests warm cups of tap water, which only seemed to infuriate them further. Please, everyone! My mother begged, her perfectly styled hair beginning to fall out of place. We are so sorry for this inconvenience. Our daughter is deeply unwell. She is trying to sabotage our lovely family holiday. Please just take a blanket and sit by the fire. Trent will fix the internet, and then we will have a magnificent dinner. I laughed out loud in my cabana. They were still desperately clinging to the lie, still trying to paint me as the unstable villain while they froze in the dark. They had no idea that resetting the router would do absolutely nothing. I had locked the entire system behind enterprise-grade encryption. Trent could rip the wires out of the wall, and it still would not give him administrative access to my smart home network. Through the screen, I watched Trent sprint out of the living room, his expensive shoes slipping frantically on the hardwood floor as he bolted toward the basement server room. He was suffocating under the pressure. The $50 million deal was slipping through his fingers, and his carefully constructed illusion of elite wealth was crumbling into dust before his very eyes. He needed a miracle to save this dinner, and with his own bank accounts completely empty, I knew exactly what his next desperate illegal move would be. I switched the camera feed to my master bedroom and waited for the rat to walk directly into the trap. I adjusted the feed on my tablet, bypassing the chaotic dining room and navigating directly to the basement security cameras. I needed to see how Trent was handling the pressure. The screen flickered, revealing the concrete walls of the estate's server room. Trent was standing in front of the massive metal rack that housed the property's enterprise-grade routing system. He was practically vibrating with rage. He ripped the protective metal panel off the wall, staring cluelessly at the blinking blue and green lights. He yanked at thick Ethernet cables, pressed random reset buttons, and physically struck the heavy metal casing with his closed fist. Nothing happened. The encryption held perfectly. He was completely locked out of the digital ecosystem of my home. Jasmine suddenly appeared at the top of the basement stairs. She wrapped her arms tightly around her shivering shoulders, her teeth visibly chattering in the freezing air. "Trent," she yelled down at him, her voice cracking with pure panic. "Harrison is giving us exactly 1 hour before he calls his private helicopter to leave this mountain. The guests are starving and freezing in the dark. You need to order food right now. Get a premium catering company here immediately, or we are getting a divorce." Trent stared back up at his wife, his chest heaving under his expensive cashmere sweater. "I cannot just order food, Jasmine. My cards are maxed out. I leveraged everything I had on the background check and the initial flights to get them here. I need cash. I need liquid capital right now to pay a caterer." Jasmine glared at him with absolute disgust. "Figure it out, Trent. You are supposed to be a financial genius. Act like one." She turned sharply and stomped back toward the freezing living room, leaving him alone in the cold basement. I watched his face contort with a volatile mixture of rage and sheer terror. He pulled out his expensive leather wallet and dumped the contents onto a nearby storage crate. A collection of platinum and gold credit cards spilled out, catching the dim light. He stared at them, knowing that every single piece of plastic was entirely useless. He had drained them all, trying to maintain his fake lifestyle. He had absolutely zero purchasing power. He was a complete financial ghost. He looked up at the ceiling. I could see the exact moment the desperate criminal idea formed in his panicked mind. He shoved the useless cards back into his pocket and sprinted up the concrete stairs, bypassing the main floor entirely. He headed straight for the top level of the estate. He headed for my private sanctuary. I switched the camera feed on my tablet to the hidden nanny lens positioned perfectly inside my master bedroom suite. The heavy oak door swung open with a violent thud. Trent slipped inside, shutting the door quickly behind him and locking it securely. He stood in the center of my pristine room, panting heavily like a hunted animal. His eyes darted around the elegant space, scanning the velvet curtains, the custom king-sized bed, and the antique vanity. He began tearing through my personal belongings without a single shred of respect or hesitation. He ripped open my tall dresser drawers, grabbing handfuls of my expensive silk scarves and tossing them carelessly onto the hardwood floor. He pulled out my designer jewelry boxes, snapping the lids open with aggressive force. He was frantically searching for cash, a spare checkbook, or anything he could immediately pawn to save his disastrous evening. "Jasmine is going to leave me," he whispered, frantically pacing the length of my bedroom. "She thinks I am a multimillionaire. If she finds out I cannot even afford to buy groceries, she will file for divorce before the new year." He kicked a fallen shoebox across the room, his face twisted in pure desperation. "Mom said Naomi would handle this. Mom promised she would just fall in line and do the cooking. Why did she have to be so stubborn today of all days?" He blamed me for not volunteering to be his unpaid servant. He blamed our mother for failing to control me. He blamed everyone but himself. This was the ultimate symptom of a golden child who had never faced a single consequence in his 35 years of life. He was a hollow shell of a man, propped up entirely by the enabling behavior of our parents and my silent financial contributions. Now that the props were removed, He was collapsing under his own weight. Trent wiped his sweaty palms on his trousers. He approached my mahogany desk, his eyes wide and manic. He ripped open the top drawer, scattering my expensive fountain pens and custom stationery. He moved to the second drawer, aggressively tossing a stack of sealed business envelopes onto the ruined floor. He was breathing heavily, cursing my name with every failed attempt. "You ungrateful spinster," he growled, ripping open the final heavy-bottom drawer. "You ruin everything. You always try to ruin my life, and you sit there acting like you are so much better than us. I swear I will make you pay for this." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my mimosa in the warm Hawaiian sun. I was infinitely better than him. I had built a massive corporate empire through actual hard work, relentless dedication, and absolute financial discipline. I had purchased this $10 million estate with cash I earned through my property management firm. I had spent a decade acting as a human shield for my family, protecting them from the legal and financial consequences of their own staggering stupidity. But that era was officially over. I was no longer their shield. I was their ultimate reckoning. Trent stared down into the velvet-lined bottom drawer of the mahogany desk. He froze completely. His frantic, destructive movements ceased. The heavy, panicked breathing stopped. He had found the exact bait I left for him. Resting perfectly in the center of the velvet-lined drawer was a sleek, heavy metal corporate black card. It clearly bore the name Apex Luxury Management, embossed in silver lettering right beneath my own name. I had intentionally placed it there before I left for the airport. I knew my brother intimately. I knew his sheer desperation, his staggering sense of entitlement, and his absolute lack of a moral compass would override any basic legal logic. Trent reached down with trembling fingers and picked up the cold metal card. The panic completely vanished from his eyes. It was instantly replaced by his usual unearned arrogance. A greedy, triumphant smile spread across his sweaty face. He flipped the card over, examining the security code on the back. I watched the high-definition feed as he let out a sharp breath of relief. "She owes me this," Trent muttered aloud to the empty room. "She has been living rent-free under our parents' roof for years. This is family money anyway. She is just throwing a temper tantrum. She would never actually call the cops on her own flesh and blood. Mom and Dad would never allow it." His rationalization was incredibly pathetic. He genuinely believed he was untouchable. He assumed my boundaries were fake, just a dramatic bluff that would crumble under the weight of family loyalty. He thought I would just absorb the massive financial hit, like I had always done in the past, quietly paying for his luxurious lifestyle to keep the peace and protect our parents from embarrassment. He was dead wrong. He had no idea that the card was strictly monitored by my corporate accounting team, equipped with real-time fraud tracking that flagged any unusual transactions instantly. Trent pulled his smartphone from his pocket. His hands were no longer shaking. He quickly opened a web browser and searched for the most elite, exclusive catering service in the entire Aspen Valley. He found a company known for servicing private jets and billionaire retreats. He tapped the screen and dialed their emergency dispatch number. I turned up the audio feed on my tablet, making sure I caught every single word of his impending felony. A dispatcher answered on the second ring. Trent immediately puffed out his chest, pacing back and forth across my ruined bedroom floor. He slipped effortlessly back into his fake high society persona. "Yes, good evening," Trent lied smoothly into the receiver, deepening his voice to sound authoritative. "This is Trent Foster. I am hosting a private gathering for Harrison Cole and a large party of highly influential investors at my estate. My private chef just had a severe medical emergency, and I need a premium luxury catering package delivered immediately." The dispatcher clearly informed him that an emergency same-day service for 30 people on a holiday weekend would carry a massive premium surcharge. Trent did not even flinch. He laughed a fake, hearty laugh. "Money is absolutely no object," Trent boasted, gripping my stolen corporate card tightly in his sweaty palm. "I need your absolute best team dispatched to my property right now. I want beluga, caviar, white truffles, butter-poached lobster tails, and Wagyu tomahawk steaks. Bring your finest vintage wines and premium champagne. The absolute works. We are not sparing a single expense tonight." The caterer tallied up the emergency request. I heard the faint tinny voice through the phone speaker inform my brother that the total cost for the rush order and premium ingredients would be a staggering $15,000. The dispatcher asked for a credit card to secure the transaction before they loaded the vans. Trent did not show a single ounce of hesitation. He held my corporate black card up to the light and confidently rattled off the 16-digit number. He read the expiration date and the security code. He authorized a $15,000 charge without a second thought. He was committing a major financial crime, casually standing in the middle of my bedroom, using my hard-earned assets to feed a man he was trying to con out of $50 million. There was a tense, agonizing pause on the audio feed. The catering dispatcher was running the card through their merchant system. Trent held his breath, biting his bottom lip. He was silently praying that the card had not been deactivated. He closed his eyes tightly. Then the dispatcher returned to the line. "The payment has been successfully authorized, Mr. Foster. Our executive chefs are loading the vans right now. We will be at your estate in less than 2 hours to prepare and serve the meal." Trent let out a massive, shuddering gasp of relief. He thanked the dispatcher and hung up the phone. He kissed the metal credit card, actually pressing his lips against the plastic, and shoved it deep into his trousers pocket. He threw his arms up in the air, performing a silent, victorious celebration dance in the middle of my ransacked bedroom. "I saved it," he whispered to himself, staring at his reflection in my full-length vanity mirror. "I am a genius. Harrison will sign the contract by dessert, and Jasmine will never know I was completely broke. I just saved everything." He smoothed down his expensive cashmere sweater, fixing his hair and wiping the sweat from his forehead. He practiced his smug, arrogant smile in the mirror, transforming back into the wealthy financial broker he pretended to be. He adjusted his collar, took one last look around my destroyed bedroom, and confidently marched out the door to share the good news with his freezing, angry guests. 2,000 miles away in Maui, a bright red notification flashed across my phone screen. It illuminated the dark interior of my private beachfront cabana. The alert read, "Apex Luxury Management Fraud Alert. Unauthorized charge of $15,000 pending at Summit Culinary Prestige." I stared at the glowing screen, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. The bait had been taken. The trap had snapped shut perfectly. My brother had just legally cemented his own destruction. I did not hit the decline button. I did not freeze the account right away. I needed the transaction to fully clear the banking system to ensure the charges would stick in a court of law. I simply sat back against the plush cushions, listening to the gentle crash of the Pacific Ocean, and waited for the perfect moment to execute my final strike. I kept my eyes locked on the glowing screen of my smartphone. The banking application for Apex Luxury Management displayed the red pending status next to the massive $15,000 charge. I knew exactly how merchant processing worked. When a vendor swipes a card for a large catering order, the funds are initially placed on a temporary hold to ensure the account has sufficient capital. If I click the decline button right, then the bank would simply reject the authorization. Trent would be deeply embarrassed when the caterer called him back to report a declined card. But embarrassment was not a felony. Embarrassment would not put him in handcuffs. I needed the caterer to officially accept the authorization code and move the transaction into a fully cleared status. I needed the theft to become an irreversible, legally binding crime. So I waited. I set my phone down on the glass table beside my lounger and signaled the cabana attendant for another round of sparkling water. The Hawaiian sun was beginning its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in breathtaking shades of deep violet and brilliant tangerine. A gentle, warm breeze rustled the palm fronds overhead. The contrast between my absolute tropical serenity and the impending legal destruction I was about to rain down on my brother was intensely satisfying. I closed my eyes and listened to the rhythmic sound of the waves, mentally counting down the minutes. I was giving the Aspen Catering Company exactly enough time to assemble their culinary team, load their delivery vans, and run the final batch process on their point-of-sale system. Exactly 35 minutes later, my phone vibrated violently against the glass tabletop. I picked it up immediately. The banking application had automatically refreshed. The red pending tag had vanished. The transaction status was now displayed in bold permanent black text. Posted. The catering company had officially captured the funds. The money had legally left my corporate account. The trap was irrevocably sprung. A slow, genuinely joyful smile spread across my face. I opened the security settings within my corporate banking portal. I navigated directly to the card management tab. I found the specific black card ending in 8899. I tapped the screen once, selecting the option to report the card as lost or stolen. A secondary prompt popped up warning me that this action would permanently deactivate the physical card and instantly flag all recent transactions for corporate fraud investigation. I did not hesitate for a single second. I pressed confirm. The digital padlock clicked shut. The card sitting in Trent's pocket was now nothing more than a useless piece of plastic flagged in the global banking network as stolen property. But a simple bank investigation was not going to be enough for what he had put me through. I needed immediate physical consequences. I needed a public spectacle. I opened my contacts and bypassed the standard emergency services. As a high-net-worth property owner in Pitkin County, I had the direct dispatch number for the Aspen Local Police Department saved in my phone for property management emergencies. I pressed the call button and brought the device to my ear, ensuring my posture was straight and my voice was completely devoid of any familial emotion. I was no longer Naomi the sister. I was Naomi Foster, the ruthless chief executive officer protecting her corporate assets. A dispatcher answered on the third ring. Aspen Police Dispatch. How can I direct your call? Hello, I said, keeping my tone incredibly sharp, authoritative, and perfectly calm. I am the CEO of Apex Luxury Management. My corporate card was stolen, and an unauthorized $15,000 charge was just made at my private residence. I need officers dispatched immediately. The dispatcher's voice shifted instantly from routine boredom to high alert. The massive dollar amount automatically triggered a felony response protocol. I can assist you with that, ma'am. Are you currently at the residence where the theft occurred? No, I replied smoothly. I am currently out of state on a business trip. However, I have a comprehensive smart home security system actively running at the property. I have live high-definition video evidence of the suspect breaking into my master bedroom, searching my private drawers, and physically stealing the corporate card. I also have the exact timestamp of him making the fraudulent phone call to authorize the $15,000 catering charge. I understand, the dispatcher said, the sound of rapid typing echoing over the line. Can you provide the address of the residence and the name of the suspect, please? I recited the exact address of my sprawling Aspen estate without missing a beat. The suspect is my biological brother, Trent Foster. However, I need to make it absolutely clear that he does not have legal permission to reside at this property. He is not on the deed. He has zero ownership stake in the estate, and he holds absolutely no position within Apex Luxury Management. He is currently acting as a trespasser and a squatter. I paused for a fraction of a second to let the severity of the situation sink in before dropping the final piece of crucial information. Furthermore, I continued, my voice dropping an octave. He is currently using my stolen corporate funds to host an unauthorized gathering of 30 high-net-worth individuals inside my home to cover up his own financial insolvency. He is attempting to secure a $50 million investment from these people under the fraudulent pretense that he owns my estate and my assets. The catering company he paid with my stolen card is likely arriving at the property very soon. I need patrol units sent to the house immediately to execute an arrest for felony credit card fraud before he completely compromises my corporate reputation. The rapid typing on the other end of the line intensified. Understood, Ms. Foster. We take corporate theft and fraud of this magnitude very seriously. I am dispatching 2 patrol units to your estate right now. They will arrive on the scene in approximately 8 minutes. We will need you to forward the security footage to our evidence portal as soon as possible. I will have my legal team send the video files and the digital property deed to your department within the hour I confirmed. Please inform your officers that the suspect is highly manipulative and will likely attempt to claim this is a simple family dispute to avoid arrest. Do not let him brush this off. I am pressing full criminal charges on behalf of my corporation. We have your statement on record, the dispatcher assured me. The officers will handle the situation accordingly. I thanked her and ended the call. I set my phone down and looked back out at the beautiful, endless ocean. I had just initiated the complete destruction of my brother's life. He had spent decades hiding behind my parents, avoiding consequences, and stealing my peace of mind. Now he was about to face the full, unyielding weight of the American justice system. There were no parents around to shield him from a felony conviction. I picked up my tablet and opened the smart home application once more. I switched the camera feed to the grand front driveway of the Aspen estate. The heavy snow was still falling, covering the ground in a pristine layer of white. I leaned in close to the screen, eagerly waiting for the show to begin. The police were on their way, and Trent's extravagant stolen dinner party was about to be spectacularly ruined. Through the high-definition lens of the outdoor security camera, I watched a parade of pristine white vans turn off the main mountain road and climb the steep heated driveway of the Aspen estate. The vehicles bore the elegant silver logo of Summit Culinary Prestige, the exact high-end catering service my brother had defrauded just under an hour ago. The heavy tires crunched over the freshly fallen snow, coming to a smooth halt right near the grand front entrance. The heavy side doors of the vans slid open in unison. A small army of professional chefs and highly trained waitstaff stepped out into the freezing Colorado night, wearing immaculate white coats and carrying massive insulated coolers. I switched the camera feed to the main foyer. Trent was standing by the massive oak doors, staring through the glass side panels. When he saw the catering team arriving, the sheer, unadulterated relief that washed over his face was almost comical. He closed his eyes, dropped his head back, and let out a massive, shuddering breath. His shoulders, which had been practically touching his ears in pure panic, finally slumped down. He quickly wiped the nervous sweat from his forehead with the sleeve of his cashmere sweater, transforming his expression from absolute terror back to his signature unearned arrogance. He threw open the front doors, welcoming the catering director with a fake hearty handshake. "Right this way," Trent commanded, projecting his voice loudly so the freezing billionaires in the adjacent living room could hear him. "Take everything straight to the main dining room and the chef kitchen. My guests are expecting absolute perfection tonight. Do not keep us waiting any longer than necessary." The catering team moved with incredible military precision. They marched into the house carrying heavy silver cloches, wooden crates overflowing with fresh black truffles, and massive coolers packed with dry ice to preserve the imported beluga caviar. They brought their own portable culinary heating elements, quickly setting up temporary warming stations in the freezing kitchen. They completely ignored the pathetic rock-hard discount turkey sitting abandoned in the sink. Within minutes, the aroma of rich butter, poached lobster tails, and searing Wagyu beef began to waft through the frigid air of the estate, masking the tension that had suffocated the house just moments prior. I changed the tablet view to the living room. My mother Brenda was gripping my father's arm, her eyes wide with overwhelming relief. They had been terrified of facing public humiliation in front of their wealthy peers. Now, watching the five-star feast being assembled before their very eyes, they immediately reverted to their enabling delusional behavior. My father Richard clapped Trent proudly on the back, whispering something about how he always knew his son would save the day. They completely ignored the fact that Trent had been absolutely destitute just an hour prior. They did not care how he procured the food as long as the illusion of their high society status remained entirely intact. Jasmine, who had been furious and shivering just moments ago, suddenly regained her haughty posture. She tightened her expensive silk robe around her waist, lifted her chin, and strutted into the dining room. She began snapping her fingers at the catering staff, ordering them to arrange the crystal glassware faster and demanding that they perfectly align the heavy silver cutlery. She was playing the role of the demanding, wealthy hostess to absolute perfection, completely oblivious to the fact that she was standing in my house, ordering around staff paid for by my stolen corporate credit card. The 30 VIP guests who had been grumbling and huddling under spare blankets near the stone fireplace began to stir. The promise of a world-class meal temporarily distracted them from the bone-chilling 50-degree temperatures and the completely non-existent internet connection. They slowly migrated toward the grand dining room, their eyes widening at the spectacular culinary display taking shape on the long mahogany table. The chefs were delicately shaving truffles over handmade pasta, creating an atmosphere of sheer culinary decadence. Trent seized the opportunity to solidify his massive lie. He walked straight up to Harrison Cole, puffing out his chest and flashing his brightest, most artificial smile. The billionaire investor was still wearing his heavy wool scarf indoors, looking thoroughly displeased, but his attention was undeniably captured by the extravagant spread. "I sincerely apologize for the slight delay," Harrison Trent said smoothly, his voice dripping with absolute confidence. "When my mentally unstable sister abandoned her duties this morning, I had to pivot quickly. Luckily, I have some highly exclusive local connections in this valley. I made a few private phone calls to the owners of Summit Culinary Prestige. They usually require months of advance notice for a holiday weekend, but they owed me a personal favor. I pulled some strings, called in some heavy markers, and made sure they brought out their absolute finest reserves for you and your team tonight." I sat in my Hawaiian cabana, listening to the crystal-clear audio feed, utterly astounded by the sheer magnitude of his delusion. He was standing there, broke, panicked, and entirely dependent on my stolen money, yet he was bragging about his elite power and influence. He was weaving a masterful web of deception, taking full credit for a luxury experience he had essentially robbed at gunpoint. Harrison Cole offered a slow, evaluating nod. The billionaire did not look entirely convinced, but the sight of a massive Wagyu tomahawk steak being carved by a professional chef clearly softened his immediate anger. "We appreciate the effort to correct the situation," Foster Harrison replied, his deep voice echoing in the dining room. "A true leader knows how to handle sudden crises. Let us hope the rest of this weekend proceeds with a bit more competence and warmth." "Absolutely, Harrison. You have my word," Trent promised, bowing his head slightly in submission. "Tonight is just a small taste of how well I take care of my most valued investment partners." Jasmine walked up behind Trent and elegantly looped her arm through his. She flashed a dazzling, smug smile at the crowd of billionaires. She looked incredibly proud of her husband, entirely convinced that they had successfully weathered the storm and secured the $50 million bag. They were standing at the absolute peak of their fake mountain, breathing in the thin air of their own massive lies. They thought they had won the night. They thought they were brilliant, untouchable elites who had outsmarted everyone. They had absolutely no idea that their entire performance was a ticking time bomb. I stared at the tablet screen, my finger tracing the edge of the glass. The catering staff was finishing the final plating. The guests were taking their seats. Trent was raising a glass of expensive vintage champagne to propose a toast to his own fabricated success. He was entirely blind to the reality speeding up the mountain road toward him. The trap had been baited, the cheese had been taken, and the heavy steel cage was hovering mere inches above his head. I did not blink, refusing to miss a single second of the impending collision between his fragile ego and the brutal, unforgiving force of the law. The dining room erupted into a symphony of confusion as the sharp, piercing wail of sirens cut through the festive music. Bright, rhythmic strobes of red and blue light slashed across the dark aspen night, reflecting violently against the expansive glass walls of the estate. Every one of the 30 elite guests stopped eating. Forks clattered against expensive china, and a sudden suffocating silence filled the room. The transition from luxury celebration to crime scene was instantaneous. Two uniformed Aspen police officers strode into the foyer with deliberate, heavy steps. They were not here to accept an apology or negotiate a misunderstanding. Their presence was heavy and undeniable. The lead officer, a man with a stern, weather-beaten face, did not even glance at the spread of caviar and lobster. He walked straight toward the head of the table where Trent stood, his face drained of every drop of color. The officer stopped only when he was within arm's reach of my brother. His hand hovered instinctively over his utility belt. "Good evening," he announced, his voice booming through the quiet room. We are looking for the individual who authorized a $15,000 catering charge on an Apex Luxury Management corporate card ending in 8899. We are responding to an active felony theft report. Trent's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He clutched the edge of the dining table to keep his knees from buckling. The arrogance that had fueled his entire evening vanished, replaced by a raw, naked terror. He stammered, his eyes darting toward Harrison Cole, who was now standing, his face twisted in a mixture of confusion and profound disgust. "Officers, please lower your voices," Trent squeaked, his voice cracking painfully. "There is a massive misunderstanding here. I am the owner of this estate. That credit card belongs to my sister. This is just a simple, private family dispute over dinner expenses. She is currently having a severe mental health episode and she is being incredibly vindictive. She is trying to ruin my reputation and sabotage this $50 million deal. There is absolutely no need for law enforcement to be involved. I will resolve this with her immediately if you just give me a moment to make a phone call." The lead officer did not smile. He did not lower his voice. He pulled a digital tablet from his belt and tapped the screen with clinical efficiency. "Sir, public records indicate that this property is solely owned by Naomi Foster. You are not on the deed. You are a guest here. Furthermore, the credit card in question does not belong to a family member. It belongs to a registered corporation. The chief executive officer of that corporation has officially reported the card stolen within the last 20 minutes. You have committed felony credit card fraud across state lines. Step away from the table and keep your hands where I can see them." A collective horrified gasp rippled through the gathered VIP guests. They began whispering to each other, their voices filled with sharp, biting judgment. They were no longer investors watching a successful man host a party. They were witnesses to a crime. Jasmine stared at Trent, her eyes wide with absolute shell-shocked horror. She seemed to be seeing him clearly for the very first time, stripped of his fake suit and his stolen wealth. My mother Brenda stood up from her chair, her face flushed with a desperate need to save the family image. "Officer, you do not understand," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "My son is a highly respected financial broker. This must be a mistake. Naomi is just acting out because she is jealous of her brother's success. She always has been the difficult one in the family. Please just listen to us. We can pay the $15,000 right now. Just put the bill on my personal account." The officer looked at my mother as if she had just suggested something utterly absurd. "Ma'am, this is a criminal investigation, not a billing department. Restitution does not undo the act of felony fraud. Sir, I am going to ask you one last time to step away from the table." Trent stood perfectly still, his eyes wide and vacant. He looked at the handcuffs hanging from the officer's belt, then toward the dining room exit, where 30 of the most powerful people in the country were watching his life evaporate. The billionaire Harrison Cole took a single step toward Trent. His presence alone was enough to make Trent shrink. "Is this true?" Foster Harrison asked, his voice low and vibrating with a dangerous cold intensity. "Did you steal a card to feed me? Is this the level of integrity you bring to the investment world?" Trent tried to find his voice. "Harrison, I can explain. My sister has been plotting against me. I swear on everything I love, this was a misunderstanding. I have the funds. I am a millionaire. I own this estate. I am the future of this industry." Harrison gave a short, sharp laugh that held zero amusement. "You own nothing. You have no assets. You have no integrity. And you certainly have no future with my firm. I have never been more insulted in my life. I came here expecting a professional partnership, and instead, I found a petty criminal playing dress-up in his sister's house." He signaled to his entourage. "We are leaving. I want every single one of my partners on the next flight out of Aspen. I do not want to see this man's face ever again." As the billionaire and his entourage began to turn, Trent lunged forward, trying to grab Harrison's coat to stop him. The officers acted instantly. They shoved Trent backward, pinning him firmly against the wall. Trent's cries for mercy were loud and desperate, echoing off the high ceilings as the heavy steel cuffs were cinched tight around his wrists. The sound of the metal locking into place was the final nail in the coffin of his manufactured life. I watched it all from my cabana in Maui, the high-definition feed, capturing the absolute devastation of his expression as the officers hauled him toward the front entrance. The catering team stopped serving, the guests turned their backs, and my family remained frozen in their seats, abandoned in the dark, freezing house of lies they had built. My revenge was not just cold, it was clinical, absolute, and entirely deserved. The dining room, once a temple of calculated pretension, had become a theater of total wreckage. My mother Brenda collapsed into her velvet-upholstered dining chair, her face a pale mask of disbelief. She kept stammering about family reputations and private settlements, her voice rising in pitch until it was little more than a rhythmic, panicked keening. She looked at the officers not with respect, but with the bewildered expectation that they would surely defer to her social status. When they didn't, her world simply ceased to function. Jasmine was the one who truly unsettled me. She stood perfectly still, her hands dropped to her sides, her eyes fixed on Trent's face with a predatory cold intensity. The smug socialite facade she had spent years constructing had dissolved in the presence of the flashing police lights. She didn't cry, she didn't scream. She simply watched him calculating the loss of her own investment in his lie. She had married a man she believed was royalty, only to find him handcuffed in a room full of people she desperately wanted to impress. Her horror wasn't just for him. It was for the realization that her own ladder to the top had just snapped in half. Trent, however, was past the point of damage control. The weight of his crime, compounded by the sheer public spectacle, pushed him into a state of manic, incoherent defense. He was still pressed against the mahogany wall, his eyes darting toward the open front door where his 30 VIP guests were huddled in a confused, murmuring mass. He looked at them with a desperate need for validation, as if he could still lecture them into believing his version of the night. Harrison Cole remained the focal point of the chaos. The billionaire hadn't moved an inch. He watched the officers move around Trent with the detached interest of someone observing a particularly messy accident on a highway. He leaned over, resting his palms on the dining table, and looked directly into the camera lens of the smart home monitor, seemingly aware that the estate owner was watching every second. Ms. Foster Harrison called out into the empty room, his voice calm and terrifyingly smooth. "If you are watching this, please be assured that my firm will be withdrawing all pending contracts with this individual immediately. I would be honored to discuss a direct partnership with a businesswoman who operates with your level of precision and security." The weight of his words hit Trent like a physical blow. He lunged forward again, his cuffs rattling against the stone fireplace mantel. "Harrison, wait. I can explain. It's my sister. She's been planning this. She's an Apex executive. She controls the security. She's been controlling every single thing from her laptop." The officer shoved him forward, signaling for his partner to assist in escorting him out. "Shut up and move," the officer commanded, his voice firm and final. Trent stumbled, his designer loafers sliding on the spilled, expensive scotch. As they dragged him toward the foyer, he passed directly by my mother. Brenda reached out a trembling hand, trying to grab his sleeve, but the officer firmly redirected her. "Ma'am, please step back. Do not interfere with an active arrest, or you will be charged with obstruction of justice." Brenda fell back as if slapped, her hand hovering in the empty air. I watched from my cabana as the officers marched Trent out the front door. The contrast was jarring. The outside of the estate was beautiful snow falling softly on the manicured hedges, while inside my family stood surrounded by the wreckage of their own making. I watched as they loaded him into the back of the cruiser. My father, Richard, who had spent his entire life valuing appearance over substance, stood in the doorway. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, his shoulders hunched, his eyes fixed on the taillights of the patrol car. The guests were scrambling. They were eager to distance themselves from the fraudster who had nearly conned them out of their time and money. Harrison Cole was the first to leave, walking past my father without even offering a nod. His entourage followed a river of dark coats and expensive leather bags streaming toward the waiting black SUVs. The exclusivity of the retreat had been replaced by the desperate, frantic speed of people fleeing a sinking ship. Jasmine remained in the dining room picking up her dropped wedding ring from the floor. She looked at it for a moment, the diamond catching the chandelier light, before she placed it on the table and walked out the door, passing my parents without a single word. She was done with the charade. She was done with the Fosters. She was a woman who knew exactly how to salvage what remained of her own reputation, and that meant burning every bridge leading back to Trent. The house was suddenly quiet. The catering staff had stopped working the moment the police arrived, and they were now standing by the back exit nervously checking their watches. My mother was slumped in her chair, staring at the untouched feast as if it could bring back her son's reputation. My father stood on the porch, his back to the room looking out into the pitch-black forest. I stood up from my chair on the beach and walked toward the water, the cold surf pulling at my toes. My work here was done. I didn't need to say a word. They had done the job for me. They had shown the world their true character, their greed, and their complete lack of accountability. I wasn't just the successful sister anymore. I was the architect of their downfall, and I felt nothing but a profound, overwhelming sense of peace. The storm in Aspen was raging, but I was in the middle of a perfect Hawaiian night. My future was secured, my professional reputation was soaring, and for the first time in 33 years, I owed my family absolutely nothing. The high-definition video feed connected with a sharp digital chime that seemed to vibrate through the entire Aspen estate. Suddenly, the massive 85-inch television above the stone fireplace erupted with life. The image quality was breathtaking. I was projected onto the screen in stunning, crisp clarity, the contrast between the cold, dark, and panicked living room in Colorado and my vibrant golden Hawaiian sunset almost violent in its intensity. I sat in the plush, overstuffed chair of my private cabana. I wore a deep midnight blue silk dress that flowed over my shoulders, and I held a cold, shimmering cocktail in my hand. Behind me, the ocean waves rolled rhythmically against the pristine white sand, the horizon burning with the fiery dying light of a day well spent. I looked utterly at peace, the absolute antithesis of the shivering, sobbing disaster occurring in my living room. Trent was the first to react. He lunged toward the television screen like a man possessed, his handcuffed wrists clanking loudly against the wood of the cabinetry. "Naomi," he screamed, his face contorted in a mask of absolute unvarnished terror. Tell these officers you gave me permission. Tell them it's a massive mistake." My father Richard, who had spent decades positioning himself as a pillar of the local business community, scrambled to stand in front of the screen, his hands raised as if he could physically shield the VIPs from my image. "Naomi, you are going too far," he growled, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and lingering misplaced authority. "We are your family. Do not destroy your brother over a simple misunderstanding. This is private property. We can settle this without the police." I did not flinch. I did not soften. I didn't even look at my father. I focused my eyes directly into the camera lens, looking through the screen at the entire room full of people. "I have been listening to your lies for the last hour," I said, my voice cutting through the silence with the precision of a scalpel. "You have told Harrison Cole and his partners that you own this house. You have told them I am an unstable, mentally ill woman who abandoned her responsibilities." I held my cocktail glass up to the light, admiring the way the sunset refracted through the ice. "Everything you said in the last hour is a complete and total fabrication. I am the sole legal owner of this estate. My corporation, Apex Luxury Management, owns the account that was just compromised by felony fraud. I have authorized no one, and I mean absolutely no one, to act on my behalf, especially not a man who has spent his entire adult life failing at every single endeavor he touches." Harrison Cole stood perfectly still, his eyes darting between Trent's shivering handcuffed figure and my calm professional appearance on the massive screen. He looked from the man who had tried to con him out of $50 million to the woman who had effectively neutralized that con in under 10 minutes. The lead officer stepped toward the screen, checking the identity verification on his tablet against the live feed. Ms. Foster, he asked, his voice now entirely respectful. We have the suspect Trent Foster in custody. You are formally pressing charges for the $15,000 fraudulent charge and for trespassing on your property. I nodded once, my expression stone cold. I am pressing full criminal charges. I am also filing a formal report for the theft of my corporate assets, unauthorized use of my private residence, and harassment. My legal team has already provided the digital evidence of his intrusion into my master's suite earlier this evening. The room erupted in a fresh wave of panic. Trent collapsed back onto the floor, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking with the realization that he was heading to a jail cell. My mother tried to rush the screen, her nails scratching against the glass display. Naomi, you cannot do this to us. People are watching. Our reputation is everything. I looked at my mother, the woman who had nurtured my brother's delusions for 30 years while actively undermining my every achievement. Mom, you are worried about your reputation, I asked, my voice chillingly soft. Your reputation is built on sand. You spent years hiding my father's gambling, hiding my brother's failures, and hiding your own resentment toward me. Tonight is the day the truth comes out. I took another long, slow sip of my drink. I didn't care who was watching. I didn't care about their horrified gasps or their judgmental whispers. I had spent 33 years trapped in the shadow of their expectations, always trying to be the good daughter, who never made a scene, who never complained, who never demanded the space she had earned. That person was dead. The billionaire investor Harrison Cole finally moved. He pulled out his phone and started recording the screen, his face twisted in a mocking smirk. He pointed his camera directly at Trent, who was sobbing on the rug, and then toward the screen where I sat in paradise. What a show! Harrison remarked, his voice loud enough to be heard across the entire room. Mr. Foster, I have seen some desperate attempts at fraud, but this takes the prize. I look forward to seeing your mugshot in the morning paper. He didn't wait for a rebuttal. He signaled his team, and within seconds the 30 elite investors were moving toward the foyer. They walked past my parents without a single acknowledgement, a stream of dark suits and expensive overcoats departing the house of cards. They weren't just leaving, they were making sure they were seen leaving, effectively signing the death warrant for Trent's professional reputation. I watched as the room emptied, leaving only the police, the sobbing mess of my brother and my parents, who were now standing in the middle of a massive, cold, and empty house. My father tried to look at the screen one last time, but I simply closed the lid of my iPad. The connection snapped. I was alone in the quiet cabana. The ocean continued its steady, ancient rhythm. I wasn't just safe, I was absolute. I was the master of my own fate, and for the first time in my life, I felt the sheer power of knowing that I had done exactly what needed to be done. The performance was over, and the curtains had fallen on their pathetic, fraudulent little lives. I ordered another drink, toasted the dark horizon, and didn't give them another thought. The atmosphere inside the Aspen estate was no longer just tense. It had crossed into the realm of the surreal. My mother Brenda was shaking so violently that her designer jewelry rattled against her collarbone. She had dropped to her knees on the cold, unforgiving marble floor, her expensive gown fanning out around her like a broken wing. She wasn't praying, she was pleading. Her eyes, usually so calculated and sharp, were swimming with desperate, frantic tears. Naomi, she wailed, reaching out to grasp at the air where I would have been if I were there in person. Please listen to me. This is your brother, your blood. We made a mistake, yes, but we are a family. You cannot stand by and watch them haul him away in handcuffs. Tell the officers you authorized the transaction. Tell them it was a simple mix-up. If you do this, if you save him now, we will never mention this night again. We will fix everything. I didn't blink. I sat perfectly still in my cabana, watching the tragedy through the tablet. My mother's desperation was a mirror of every time she had forced me to apologize for someone else's behavior throughout my entire life. She was still trying to maneuver me like a chess piece, hoping that if she just used the right tone, the right amount of maternal guilt, I would crumble. Richard, my father, joined her on the floor. He was a man who had built his reputation on power and absolute control, but in this moment he was reduced to a groveling shadow of his former self. He looked up at the camera lens, his face twisted in a mask of impotent rage and crushing fear. "Naomi, you are going to send your own brother to prison over a dinner," he shouted, his voice cracking with sheer pathetic terror. "Think about what this does to our name. Think about the legacy we have built. If Trent goes to jail, the scandal will destroy everything we have worked for." I felt a surge of cold fire in my chest. Legacy. They kept using that word. They had spent 3 decades building a legacy on the backs of other people's labor, on lies about their wealth, and on the systematic erasure of my own professional identity. They weren't protecting a legacy. They were desperately trying to bury the evidence of their own moral bankruptcy. I leaned back, resting my elbows on the arms of the cabana chair. My voice was calm, measured, and sharper than any blade they had ever aimed at me. "You ordered me to be a servant in my own house," I said, my words amplified perfectly through the estate's speaker system. "You told everyone at this table that I was a mentally unstable failure who had abandoned my responsibilities. You weaponized my absence to justify your own cruelty. And now you want me to commit perjury to save the person who actively conspired to rob me." The room full of remaining guests gasped. A few of them, having stayed behind despite the exodus of the billionaires, looked at my parents with newfound clarity. They were finally seeing the rot beneath the pristine surface. I turned my attention to the lead officer, who was currently reading Trent his Miranda rights. "Officer," I said, my tone switching to absolute icy professionalism, "I do not authorize the individual currently in your custody to use my corporate accounts. I do not authorize his presence on my private property. I am the sole owner of Apex Luxury Management, and the card used to facilitate this theft is corporate property. I am pressing full formal charges for felony credit card fraud and unauthorized use of assets." Trent let out a howl of pure primitive rage, struggling against the officer's firm grip. "You traitor!" he screamed, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "You calculated this. You let me use the card. You set this whole thing up just to watch me burn." I didn't answer him. I didn't need to. His outburst was the final piece of evidence the police needed to confirm his lack of remorse and his unstable state of mind. The lead officer pulled him toward the exit, his movements efficient and indifferent to Trent's hysterical crying. My brother's legs dragged against the floor, his expensive loafers scuffing the marble as he was dragged out into the snow to face the reality he had spent his entire life avoiding. Brenda let out a high-pitched guttural sob and collapsed forward, her forehead touching the cold marble. She was defeated. The house of cards had finally blown down, and she was left in the ruins. My father remained on his knees, staring at the empty doorway where his golden sun had just been removed. The weight of his own failures seemed to physically compress him. I looked at the tablet screen one last time. I could have turned it off. I could have walked away to enjoy my evening. But I needed them to know that their influence over me had been permanently revoked. "The last time you all spoke to me," I said into the microphone, my voice echoing through the massive room, "you told me that I had no space in this family retreat. You were right. There is no space for me in a family built on lies and theft. But you also made a mistake. You forgot that the hand that feeds you can also pull the food away. I hope you enjoy the silence of this house. It is going to be your only companion for a very long time." I disconnected the call. The silence returned to my cabana, though it was different now. It was no longer the silence of exclusion or the silence of suppressed hurt. It was the silence of total, absolute victory. I had not just won. I had dismantled the architecture of their control. They would spend the next year in legal battles, financial ruin, and social exile. I would be in Hawaii, then Europe, then wherever I decided my future needed to be. I stood up and walked to the bar where the attendant was waiting with a fresh drink. I tipped him handsomely and stepped out onto the private beach. The sand was cool beneath my feet, the ocean dark and infinite before me. I realized then that the most painful thing I had ever experienced, the rejection of my parents, was the greatest favor they had ever done for me. By throwing me away, They had inadvertently forced me to become the woman I was meant to be. I didn't need their approval to be successful. I didn't need their space to be significant. I was Naomi Foster, and the world was finally open. Harrison Cole stood frozen in the center of my freezing living room, the massive 85-inch television screen dominating the space with my serene, sun-drenched face. The billionaire investor was a man who rarely looked shocked. His entire career was built on calm clinical analysis of high-risk ventures, yet he was currently staring at my image as if he were seeing a ghost. Naomi Harrison whispered again this time with a mixture of disbelief and genuine admiration. Naomi Foster of Apex Luxury Management. I didn't break character. I didn't let the weight of the moment shift my calm exterior. I kept my posture relaxed and my expression warm. Good evening, Mr. Cole. It is a pleasure to see you again. Although I am deeply sorry my property management firm could not host you under better circumstances, I would have personally overseen your stay and ensured the heating and internet were functioning at the absolute pinnacle of luxury. As you can see for yourself, the individual you are currently doing business with is nothing more than my squatter brother. He has no authority, no assets, and certainly no partnership with Apex. The billionaire straightened his posture, his eyes narrowing as he finally comprehended the scale of the deceit. He spun around to face Trent, who was still huddled on the floor in a heap of broken pride. Trent looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. His face was a landscape of pure terror, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. Trent was relying on Harrison's $50 million investment to save himself from the catastrophic debts I had been cleaning up for years. Harrison had been depending on Apex Luxury Management, my firm, to conduct the final confidential audit of Trent's assets and professional background. He had hired the absolute best in the business to verify Trent's claims. Little did he know he had inadvertently hired the very person Trent had been trying to defraud. Harrison stepped closer to my brother, his voice dropping to a dangerous low frequency that commanded the attention of every single person in the room. You told me this was your estate, Foster. You told me your family had deep roots in Colorado wealth. You told me Apex Luxury Management was a subsidiary of your own holding company. Trent opened his mouth, but only a pathetic whimpering sound emerged. He couldn't lie his way out of this one. The truth wasn't just a possibility anymore, it was an undeniable public fact. I decided to drive the final nail into the coffin. Mr. Cole, I said into the microphone, my voice clear and steady through the speakers. If your team checks the secure server at the estate, you will find that the audit Trent submitted to you was entirely fabricated using unlicensed software and stolen data. My firm has been tracking his attempts to manipulate these files for several months. He wasn't just trying to con you. He was trying to use my company's intellectual property to validate his own bankruptcy. Harrison's face turned a dangerous shade of purple. He didn't scream, which was far worse. He turned to his lead security advisor, a man who looked like he could bench press a small car. Get him out of my sight. Then he turned to the police officer who was still hovering near the door. This man is a fraud. He has stolen from me, wasted my time, and attempted to facilitate corporate espionage using a stolen credit card. Do your job. The officers didn't hesitate. They hauled Trent up by his arms, ignoring his frantic cries. Trent's heels dragged across the polished hardwood as they forced him out of the room. My mother Brenda started shrieking in a high, dissonant pitch, throwing herself toward the exit after them, but the police blocked her path. She slumped against the wall, her perfect holiday narrative completely disintegrated. Harrison Cole wasn't done. He stood in the center of my living room, the absolute center of gravity, and addressed the remaining 30 VYPs. I am sorry for this circus, he said, his voice flat. But we are leaving. Every single one of you pack your things. We are not staying in a house owned by a victim of domestic fraud, and we are certainly not doing business with anyone associated with this charade. The guests were scrambling. They were terrified of being linked to the scandal. 30 of the most powerful people in the country were tripping over their own feet in a desperate rush to distance themselves from the Foster family. They grabbed their furs and designer bags, abandoning the untouched truffle pasta and the expensive vintage wine. Watching the stampede through the camera was the greatest satisfaction I had ever known. My parents stood by the fireplace, their world crumbling around them. They had wanted a high society retreat, a show of their manufactured greatness. Instead, they had invited the one man who had the power to expose their fraud on a national scale and end their social status forever. I looked at my tablet at the screen, showing my weeping mother and my defeated, broken father. They had used me for years, assuming I would always be the quiet, obedient daughter who would stay in the background to serve their needs. They had looked down on my bakery, on my independence, and on my success because it didn't align with their narrow, superficial definition of old money. I had been the one paying their mortgage, the one maintaining the very facade they were now crying over. And yet they still felt entitled to steal from me. As the last billionaire exited the front door, leaving the house silent and cold, I reached for my tablet to end the connection. I had seen enough. My brother would be sitting in a jail cell by morning, and my parents would be forced to confront the reality that their wealth was a lie and their golden son was a common criminal. I picked up my cocktail and toasted the screen. The truth is the only currency that never devalues, I whispered to myself. I closed the connection, effectively plunging the house into a digital void. They were alone in the dark, in the cold, in the freezing Aspen Mountains, with nothing left but the consequences of their own choosing. I stood up and walked toward the sliding glass door of my cabana, stepping out into the cool evening air of Hawaii. The sky was turning a deep, velvety indigo, the first stars beginning to shimmer above the ocean. I was finally truly free. No more cleanup duty, no more bailing them out, no more playing the role of the invisible daughter. I turned around, went back inside, and finally, for the first time in 33 years, I slept through the entire night without a single worry. Harrison Cole didn't look back as he marched out of the dining room. His heavy wool coat swished against his legs, a sharp, rhythmic sound that cut through the agonizing silence of the estate. Behind him, the 30 billionaires moved with a cold, synchronized efficiency. They didn't glance at my father, who was still slumped on the floor, nor did they acknowledge my mother, who had begun a low, broken sobbing that echoed off the high vaulted ceilings. They were solely focused on removing themselves from the blast radius of Trent's wreckage. The police officer grabbed Trent by the back of his expensive sweater. His movements were rough, born of a frustration with the time he had been forced to waste on this amateur fraud. He spun Trent around, pressing him forcefully against the cold stone of the fireplace mantel. The metallic clack of the handcuffs snapping into place sounded like a gunshot in the near-silent room. Trent let out a high-pitched whimpering sound, his knees finally giving out completely. He collapsed onto the hardwood, dragging the officer with him for a moment before being yanked back to his feet. Jasmine stood near the foyer, her movements strangely slow and robotic. She looked at Trent. Really looked at him for the first time since the lights had flashed. She saw the sweat stains on his shirt, the terror in his vacant eyes, and the absolute undeniable proof of his poverty. She had spent years believing she was the partner of a powerful financier. She had bought into every lie, every lavish meal, and every fake promise of grandeur. She reached up to her left hand and tugged the massive diamond ring from her finger. She didn't look at it. She didn't cherish it. She pulled her arm back and whipped it toward his chest with surprising force. The ring hit him squarely in the sternum, bouncing off the fabric of his sweater and skittering across the floor to settle near the police officer's boots. It was a worthless trinket now, a symbol of a life that never existed. She didn't say a word to him. She didn't scream, and she didn't offer comfort. She simply turned on her heel and walked out the front door, stepping directly into the path of the departing VIPs. She hitched a ride with one of the mid-tier executives, her head held high, leaving Trent to his prison cell and my parents to their ruin. My father, Richard, crawled over to the spot where Trent had been standing. He stared at the empty space where his golden son had been just moments ago. He seemed entirely incapable of understanding the shift in reality. He reached out to touch the floorboards, his fingers brushing against the spilled, expensive scotch. The lead officer walked over to my mother, Brenda, who was still huddled on the floor. "Ma'am, we need to secure the residence. Since you are not the owner of record, I need you to gather your personal belongings and vacate the premises for the duration of the investigation. We are treating this entire site as a crime scene." My mother looked up, her makeup entirely ruined her face, a mask of aging desperation. You can't do this, she breathed, her voice raspy. This is our home. My son is in your custody. We have rights. The officer pointed toward the front door. Your rights do not include occupying a crime scene while we process evidence of felony fraud and trespassing. I suggest you call a cab or a relative. You have exactly 15 minutes to remove your personal effects before we seal the house. I switched the camera angle to the living room once more. My father finally stood up, his legs shaking. He grabbed his coat, looking around the room as if it were a tomb. He walked toward the door, ignoring my mother's pleas for him to stand his ground. He knew the fight was over. He knew the police weren't leaving until the house was empty. He walked past Brenda, not even offering her his hand. He was done. The dream was over. One by one, the house of cards continued to collapse. The catering staff began to pack their things, their expressions a mix of anger and bewilderment. They had been hired to serve a dinner, not to be part of a criminal investigation. They worked in silence, packing away the expensive lobster and caviar that would never be eaten, their movements brisk and professional. They had their own reputation to protect, and they were not about to stick around to be interviewed by local law enforcement if they didn't have to. The house, which had been designed to project an image of untouchable wealth and prestige, felt suddenly cavernous, cold, and profoundly lonely. It was a hollow shell. Everything I had worked for, every dollar I had earned, was currently being treated as evidence in a fraud case. My father finally stumbled out into the snow, followed by my mother, who was sobbing openly, her dignity completely stripped away. They stood on the porch for a moment, looking toward the dark driveway, where the police cruisers and the catering vans were illuminated in the flashing lights. There was nowhere for them to go. Their friends were gone, their social status was incinerated, and their beloved son was headed to a holding cell. I watched as they eventually climbed into a taxi that someone had called for them. They didn't look back at the mansion. They didn't look at each other. They simply stared straight ahead, defeated by the absolute crushing reality of their own greed. I finally closed the security application on my tablet. The Aspen estate disappeared from my screen, replaced by the dark, quiet room of my cabana. I stood up and walked to the edge of the water. The tide was coming in, the waves pushing further up the sand with each passing moment. I took the phone out of my pocket, unlocked it, and permanently deleted the Apex Luxury Management Smart Home app. I didn't need to watch them anymore. I didn't need to control their environment. The damage was done, the truth was out, and their house of lies was burned to the ground. I turned back toward the cabana, feeling a strange, hollow sensation in my stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. It was the feeling of a life being truly, finally reset. I had spent so long building walls to protect myself from them, and now those walls were no longer necessary because the threat was gone. They were no longer the authors of my story. I was. And looking at the blank, open horizon of my future, I realized that I had finally truly made it to the other side. My parents remained in the living room, surrounded by the remnants of a dinner that cost more than most people earn in a year, yet tasted like ash. My father, Richard, had sunk onto the velvet ottoman, his head buried in his hands. The man who had spent decades projecting an image of untouchable financial security was now facing the humiliating reality of bankruptcy and public scandal. My mother, Brenda, stood near the window, her gaze fixed on the snow-covered driveway where Trent had just been driven away. She was shivering, the ambient temperature of the room dropping every minute, but she seemed beyond the point of noticing the physical discomfort. The cold was a fitting companion to the hollow life they had spent 30 years curating. I sat in my cabana in Maui, the screen of my tablet finally black. The silence of the island night felt sacred, a stark, beautiful contrast to the toxicity I had just excised from my life. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel the need to call back and offer a soft landing or a second chance. They had chosen their path. They had chosen to support a fraudulent brother over their own daughter, and now they were left to deal with the inevitable crushing weight of those choices. A few minutes later, my phone vibrated on the glass table. It was Harrison Cole again. I answered it immediately. Naomi, Harrison began, his voice devoid of the earlier tension. I've just landed back in my own jet. I wanted to reiterate how impressed I was with your handling of this nightmare. Most people would have crumbled, but you treated it like a business transaction. That is the exact kind of temperament I need for my global real estate portfolio. I have several high-value residential and commercial properties in London, Dubai, and Singapore that are currently underperforming due to poor management. I want you and Apex to take over the oversight of every single one of them. I paused, absorbing the scale of his offer. This wasn't just a contract, it was the ultimate professional vindication. It was Harrison Cole, the very man Trent had tried to hustle with a $50 stake handpicking me as his primary partner. I would be honored to review the portfolio, Mr. Cole. I said, my voice steady and professional. Apex Luxury Management is equipped to handle complex international assets. We will draft a proposal that outlines our strategy for optimizing the management of these properties. I expect to have the initial draft in your inbox by early next week. Harrison chuckled, a low, satisfied sound. I expected nothing less. Consider the contract yours, Naomi. Let us leave the Foster family drama in Aspen. I am looking forward to a long and extremely profitable partnership with you. After I hung up, I walked out onto the private beach. The sand was soft and cool beneath my feet. The rhythmic eternal sound of the ocean waves provided the perfect soundtrack for my internal reflection. For 33 years, I had been the invisible daughter. I had been the one who paid the bills, fixed the broken pipes, and accepted the scraps of affection they deigned to throw my way. They had made me believe that I was lucky to even be part of their perfect family narrative, even if my role was always behind the scenes. I looked up at the stars bright and clear in the Hawaiian sky. I realized that the greatest tragedy of my family wasn't their lack of money or their social decline. It was their total inability to recognize value when it was standing right in front of them. They had a daughter who built an empire from the dirt, who saved their home and who protected their reputation, but all they could see was a person to be used and discarded. I had learned that cutting off dead weight isn't a sign of bitterness. It's an act of profound self-love. It's the realization that your energy is a finite resource and it should never be spent on people who are determined to drain you dry. Growth is impossible when you are tethered to people who view your success as a threat to their own fragile ego. My mother's voice rang in my ears, complaining about how my bakery was not a real career, while I stood on the precipice of managing a $70 million real estate portfolio. The irony was so sharp it almost didn't feel real. But it was real. Every single cent of my success was my own. Every boundary I had set was a brick in the foundation of my new, authentic life. I walked back towards the cabana, feeling the strength in my legs and the clarity in my mind. The Aspen house would be sold within the month. My parents would be forced to find a modest apartment they could actually afford. Trent would be dealing with a criminal record that would ensure he never worked in finance again. These weren't things I did to them. These were the natural, inevitable outcomes of their own behavior. I had been the architect of my own salvation, and that was the only story that mattered. I realized that my life had been a series of plot twists designed to test my resolve, and I had passed every single one of them. I didn't need the Blackwell name. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their Christmas gatherings or their fake performative love. I sat back down in my chair and pulled up the photos of the Hawaii sunrise I had taken that morning. It was a brand new day and the horizon was finally beautifully clear. I had spent so long fighting to be included in a table where I was never truly welcome that I had failed to notice I could simply build a much better one myself. Sometimes serving your toxic family means serving them exactly what they deserve, the truth. And the truth is that you are enough. You have always been enough, and the moment you decide to walk away is the moment your real life actually begins. Have you ever walked away from a family that made you feel invisible only to find the strength to build your own peace? How did you navigate the moment you realized you didn't need their permission to be successful? Share your stories in the comments below. And if this journey of resilience resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about navigating family dynamics and reclaiming your power. Thank you for listening to my journey. Remember, your worth is not determined by those who fail to see it, but by the legacy you build for yourself, one bold decision at a time. The most profound lesson from this journey is that true independence is not merely the ability to pay one's own bills. It is the courage to release the desperate soul-crushing need for validation from those who are incapable of giving it. For years, I operated under the false belief that if I worked hard enough, achieved enough, or sacrificed enough, my family would eventually see my worth. I treated their approval as the ultimate metric of my success, which only granted them the power to define my happiness and dictate my self-esteem. This experience taught me that setting firm boundaries is not an act of malice or vengeance, but an essential act of self-preservation. When I finally stopped fighting for a seat at their table, a table where I was never truly welcome, I discovered that I had the capacity to build my own foundation. The people who truly love you will respect your boundaries and celebrate your growth, while those who rely on your exploitation will only ever see your autonomy as a threat. I also realized that grief and betrayal, while excruciating, are powerful catalysts for authenticity. By losing the external validation I had mistakenly pinned my life to, I was forced to face the raw truth of who I was without their labels. I stopped being the failure or the servant because I finally stopped accepting those definitions. The moment I walked away from their toxic expectations was the moment I began to thrive. Freedom, I discovered, is simply the byproduct of refusing to be anyone's tool. I have learned that your worth is an intrinsic quality that cannot be diminished by someone else's inability to perceive it, nor can it be amplified by their praise. If you have ever felt held back by those who refuse to acknowledge your true value, have the courage to walk away today and build a life where you are finally celebrated, not tolerated.